Welcome to the Erectile Dysfunction Radio Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to educating and empowering men to address erectile dysfunction, improve confidence, and enhance the satisfaction in their relationships. This podcast is brought to you by ErectionIQ.com. Learn more at ErectionIQ.com.
Welcome to the Erectile Dysfunction Radio Podcast. I am Mark Goldberg, certified sex therapist. I am deeply passionate about working with men like you to help resolve their ED. Today we are joined by Grant Stoddard. Grant is a journalist who has written for Men's Health, The New York Times, New York Magazine, Vice, and Playboy, among many other publications. He has authored and co-authored several books and is considered an expert on sex or a sexpert. Grant, thank you for being here.
Thank you for calling me a sexpert.
Well, today we want to discuss relationships and sexuality, and how different types of relationships can be impacting sexual performance and in particular erectile dysfunction.
Yeah.
To get us started, can you tell us a bit about your career? How did you get into this space?
I should probably provide a little bit of context. I was the least likely person to be a sexpert in my graduating class in school. I ended up moving to America and became a homeless illegal immigrant at one point. And then I got a kind of a job. It was really a paid internship because I needed money under the table. It was $5 an hour working for a sex website called nerve.com. Now, there was kind of a case of mistaken identity, and I was sent out on an assignment by mistake, and I had to have sex on the subway and write about it. I didn't tell them that I was not a writer, that I had never written before. I just asked one of my fellow interns to join me on the A train one evening, and we did the thing. I submitted my draft, rough as it was, and then I kind of got a column out of it that was called I Did It for Science, which was a kind of monthly gonzo piece in which I was sent off to do something weird in the realm, different in the realm of sex and sexuality, and write about my experience in the form of a high school lab report. And it was called I Did It for Science. And that's how I got into the space.
And I take it that things kind of rolled from there. Is that correct?
They did. And so every installment was the editorial team coming up with something fun and funny for the sexually inexperienced English intern to go and do and write about. So, my first thing was having sex on the subway. My next thing was seeing a dominatrix where I was encased in latex. My third thing was I was on the set of a porn movie about a week after 9/11, and so on and so forth.
So your columns were really experientially driven, and I know that was coming from a place where you're saying you were not experienced, but you would write about these experiences that you had. And I if I understand correctly, there have also been some experiences with certain erectile dysfunction treatments that I would love to get to a little bit later in this interview. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. But I think erectile dysfunction has been a sort of thread throughout my whole career of writing about this stuff, because as you just mentioned, or as I mentioned in the first place, I was very sexually inexperienced, and then I was thrust into these very high pressure sexual situations like having sex on the subway or attending an orgy or being on a porn set, etc., etc. So every new assignment that I was given was really sort of me being put in this very sort of intense, sort of anxiety-provoking scenario. And of course, we know what anxiety does to penises generally.
Yes, and that's a topic that we discuss at length on this podcast. What I want to ask you, Grant, is that you cover a wide range of different types of relationships. It's clear that our world is open to arrangements that diverge from a traditional monogamy paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what you have learned about consensual non-monogamy? Does this seem to help couples? Does it complicate their relationships further? Can you tell us a bit about this?
It's always impacted by where the two people are coming into it from. So there are people that are well versed who are just kind of poly people or non-monogamous people who might pair up kind of having experience and knowing the rules, and generally there's less friction that way. But from what I've seen, it's more often the case that it's usually one partner who has some experience with non-monogamy and is inviting their partner to try it. That can go any number of ways. I've been turned, if you like to use kind of, vampire terminology. I was not a non-monogamous person, and a partner suggested that we try it, and we did, and it fit great for me. But I've been on the other side of that when I've introduced it to somebody who'd never really been or played in a non-monogamous space before, and it's sometimes been successful and sometimes really not. You never know what you're going to get. Some people take to it like a duck to water, and other people say almost immediately, this is definitely not for me. In my case, actually, I tried to be non-monogamous many times, and it wasn't until I found a partner that I was really committed to and prepared to do anything for that I really gave it my all, and finally successfully.
So what I'm gathering from you, Grant, that I'm sure a lot of people who have engaged in non-monogamy have had this experience, is that it's not only an individually driven type of thing, but it really depends on the relationship in totality, whether that relationship is set up in a way or can work toward being able to facilitate a non-monogamous type of arrangement or relationship that really works. And some people can be successful in some contexts while they're not as successful in others. And that has been your experience. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and some people go through phases when one person wants to have multiple partners and the other person doesn't, and then they flip, and, it's always in a state of flux. And I think that's why the most common thing that people always say about non-monogamy and what's the most important element is excellent communication, because these aren't rules that get set. People change their mind. People change generally. People like to be non-monogamous and then completely change and be like, you know what, I've taken that as far as it goes and I don't want to do that anymore, while their partner might be still in the throes of it. I've been on either side of that equation too. So
people are dynamic. Life is dynamic. Relationships are dynamic. And that's a concept that we touch on. We talk about erectile dysfunction, but that applies way beyond ED and applies way beyond the sexual realm. And I think what you're getting at is that communication about where each person is, how open they are to engaging in non-monogamy, and accepting the reality that people change over time. And the comfort with non-monogamy can shift. Now, some couples who introduce non-monogamy are already in distress, and they're oftentimes looking for a solution. Have you encountered this? Does this tend to increase or decrease stress and anxiety? And is it effective when a couple who started with a monogamy paradigm and really is struggling is looking for some way to fix this and considers non-monogamy?
It usually doesn't work. In my experience, from what I've seen, people that had a traditionally monogamous relationship were in distress and they said, well, let's try this. I mean, I've seen it work. But usually it's sort of the cracks in a relationship become canyons at that point. Often, I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I've seen it absolutely work as well for people, at least for a certain period of time. But that's a very hard thing to pull off, especially if there's all these underlying problems, and then you're going to bring other people in the mix, and then it's often the case. One partner has many more options than the other, or one partner's circumstances make having relations with other people much easier than the other. It can be done, but it's tricky to say the least.
And I think, Grant, you mentioned before that communication is really key to being successful. A lot of times, couples who are already experiencing some form of conflict or distress may be struggling with healthy communication in the first place, which might speak to why it's oftentimes not viewed as a successful solution for a monogamous couple who's already distressed.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, especially if someone's been, even if they haven't acted on it, kind of yearning for experience with other people within the confines of a monogamous relationship, and they're like, hey, why don't we see other people? It seems like it can seem, I'm sure, to the other person like the relationship is in a death spiral at that point.
I can see several scenarios where a man can be looking to resolve partner-based erectile dysfunction, meaning he's really only experiencing ED with partner but is doing okay on his own, or he's experiencing erectile dysfunction for the first time in a non-monogamous arrangement. Feelings of jealousy, worry, attraction concerns can all be present. Have you come across this while covering this topic or experiencing this topic yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes when I've been less enthused about my partner, when I've been in a non-monogamous relationship, it's interesting when you're with a new partner, it'll be like, oh, it kind of sort of brings into sharp relief that the problem might not be with you and your level of desire, but it is partner specific. I think that sort of people who are strictly monogamous might automatically think that the problem is just their libido or their desire for the generally, but as you say, it may be partner specific. And I've certainly noticed that before. I was married for a long time, and I noticed that my body reacted differently when I was with a new partner. In the poly community, they call it NRE, new relationship energy, or that's a part of what new relationship energy is. But yeah, some of the times you feel renewed and reborn with a new partner, and it kind of causes you to really think about why your main partner isn't provoking that response in you anymore.
Yeah, so what I'm gathering is that there's an energizing effect that being with a new partner can have. Have you also encountered the reverse, though, where a man is feeling jealous about his partner going out and engaging with somebody else, and that leads to distress or anxiety or worry? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen. I'm a weird bird. I've seen it sort of. Some people are very. I know this is not about me, but as most of my writing has been first person and experiential, it kind of is. I always found it a huge turn on, like so like my partner being with another person, and then me knowing that and them telling me about that was actually increased my level of arousal. But I know for other people, it works the other way around. And they feel intimidated by this new person, and it does lead to ED problems. But also, there's this other thing where you have your main partner and everything is good, and then you have a secondary partner, and you realize that the newness of this new experience, this new person, has a diminishing effect on your level of arousal, and it's, even though you might find them wildly attractive, it's just the sort of the unknown, the sort of unfamiliar, opening night nerves, we call it among my friends. When you're with a new partner, you don't know what to expect. You don't know how they're going to perceive you. And it can have an effect on your erection. I think a friend of mine used to say the first one's for the dog, meaning, like the first attempt at having sex with a new partner when you're in a poly relationship, a non-monogamous relationship, doesn't really count, because there's this kind of new partner, and this seems so new because you have this constant partner at home, so everything they do seems sort of slightly different and strange.
It sounds like there is a lot of complexity, and it's hard to sort this out before you're actually engaging in it. How any person is going to react to any specific scenario is hard to know, but this could become something which is, on the one hand, extremely arousing, and it could lead to a renewal of sexual energy, even helping to boost sexual function. And on the other hand, some of the negative feelings that may emerge, which again are oftentimes not predictable, could enhance or even lead to some kind of sexual dysfunction.
Whenever you do anything like this, whenever you play with non-monogamy, you are introducing an element, and it could go in any number of directions, and the only way you know what's going to happen, really, unless you know yourself very well, is by giving it a go. But it could have ruinous effects on your relationship.
Right. It's a risk. Grant, infidelity or non-consensual non-monogamy is a challenge for relationships and can have a number of negative impacts, including impaired sexual function. How does this compare to consensual non-monogamy?
As it happens, I don't have much experience either personally or professionally with the former, only with the latter. As we've talked about, non-monogamy really rests on a bedrock of open communication and boundary settings and discussing what will be problematic and what may not be. Consensual non-monogamy is you're not adding that extra element of deceit and distrust, which I'm sure must be disastrous to many relationships. So I feel like and obviously non-monogamy is done wrong as often as it's done right. But when it is entered into with transparency and empathy and care and compassion, I think that it's much less likely to end in sort of disaster than the sort of cheating that goes on.
In other words, if I'm understanding you correctly, while consensual non-monogamy does come with the risks that we previously had mentioned, non-consensual non-monogamy, or what's referred to as infidelity, carries a whole nother level of emotionality, including guilt, secrecy, deception, which could really more profoundly impact sexual function.
I think the one way like non-monogamy is kind of saying, hey, we're going to try this thing. If you're up for it, we're going to give it a go. Where this winds up, nobody knows, but we're entering into it in a spirit of transparency and empathy and and trust. Whereas the other one is the polar opposite of that, and you do your thing, and then you just, I guess, hope that you don't get found out. I don't know. It's
something you haven't done and haven't covered extensively. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Because just the thought of it, I'm sweating just thinking about being in that scenario. I think I know my own body. I think that would have a much more diminishing effect on my arousal or my erectile function. The sort of prospect of being found out.
I think a lot of people have the similar experience that while being with a new partner may have a lot of arousal effects to it, having to do that in secrecy behind the back of somebody who you care about would just really diminish or erode that experience. Now, Grant, I want to come to another topic, so I want to shift a little bit here towards something that I believe you have covered. Many people chase sexual nirvana or look to reach peak experiences. I think you've covered this pursuit and have tried various things yourself. Can you tell us about that? And in particular, if you got there, and what this means for people's sexual expectations?
As I mentioned earlier, I was often sent out on these sexual adventures. I didn't have any say in what those adventures would be. They were picked by the editorial team of Nerve.com. it wasn't necessarily stuff that I wanted to do. It's stuff that I kind of tried because it was my job. Very few of them became things that I actually wanted to do in my own personal life. In 2002, one kind of appetizing opportunity came up, which was to go to a sex party. And like group sex in my mind as a teenager, and all the up until the age of 26, which is what I was then, that had loomed large. That had been a big thing. So I very nervously invited someone that I'd been on 2 dates with and said, hey, I have to go to a sex party for work. Will you come with me? She said yes. And I was like, wow, that was easy. And we went to this party, and well, without getting into too many details, she was the belle of the ball, and I was so sort of freaked out and jealous, and I barely had any sex at all because I kind of couldn't.
I appreciate you sharing that piece of the story, because it kind of speaks to this element of sexual expectations, that our minds oftentimes can create things that once we're in the situation, we may not feel nearly as comfortable, let alone not aroused. While something that we really believed would be a peak experience.
Absolutely. I was like really incredibly self-conscious. I spent most of the time at the buffet table watching her being the nexus of like this literal cluster of people. And then, when I said, I went over to her at one point and I said, listen, I have to leave. And she's like, oh, come too. And I was like, no, you can stay here. And then she's like, no, I'm going to come with you. You brought me to the party. I'm going to leave. And then I got booed. I got booed out of the first sex party I thought it was going to be great. I did not envision that. I didn't think I'd be carried out on people's shoulders necessarily, but I thought I'd be as competent as any person in there. I knew that I could get nervy, so I did take a Viagra before. I think it was the first one I ever took, and even that did not help the situation. I was so anxious or so uncomfortable and so self-conscious that it didn't work for me. And I didn't go back. I didn't go to another sex party for 10 years after that. And then I had to go to about 10 before I actually felt comfortable enough that I could actually live in that world. And since then, I've been able to do it quite well. But there was a long period of time where I thought this was the zenith of sexual experience, and it ended in disaster. Most of my sexual exploits ended in disaster, I'll be honest. But
I think it's important for our listeners to hear that, because a lot of times our minds are able to convince us that sexual bliss, sexual nirvana is right around the corner if we can only actualize what we think is happening. And for people who go ahead and do that, oftentimes they discover it doesn't quite live up to what they imagine. Now, Grant, you also mentioned that at this first party, you had used a medication to help, I assume, boost your erection, and the anxiety and the nerves were able to override that, which I think is another important thing for our listeners to hear, because those medications still require for your brain to be engaged and want to pursue pleasure, and anxiety can really get in the way of that, even if you've taken the medication.
Oh yeah, they're not magic. They just help you keep more blood in your penis, and they stop it from rushing back out again. So, but if you, if you're in that fight or flight mode, they can be rendered completely ineffective.
Along these lines, Grant, you've tried and written about a number of treatments for erectile dysfunction. And what did you learn?
Just a few of the things that I've tried, these kind of gas station male enhancement pills. Attraction to another person is the best erectile enhancement that there is, And I think in my career, I was, because I was asked to do all these sexual things a lot of the time, I kind of would end up having sex with people not because I necessarily wanted to, but because I had a sort of, obligation to, because of my work or because of my reporting. So
it sounds to me like that what you have discovered is, while some of these treatments may incrementally help boost things, one of the biggest decisive factors in erection, certainly in relatively healthy men, is what's happening up in the brain, what's happening in the mind, how engaged they are, if they're finding their partner attractive, level of anxiety, level of arousal. These factors seem to be really important. Is that correct?
I wish I could have said it as beautifully as you without going into a little anecdote. But yes, absolutely, Mark. You're completely correct. It's all in the mind. It's all about chemistry. It's all about communication. It's all about attraction. And the other things can help, but they're just really the icing on the cake.
So, Grant, have you tried anything for the mental side of erectile dysfunction? Have you tried any products or any courses or whatnot that are out there?
Yeah, I think I spoke with a therapist at some point about kind of anxiety that I had with new partners. And also I saw a hypnotherapist, again, for under the guise of an article that I was writing, but about assuaging any anxiety that I had with a new partner. Because it was, I got into the habit of every time that I was going to be, it was like a first date and it was going to be the first time that we were going to have sex together. I would always have a little bit sildenafil, which is generic Viagra, just to sort of, as a sort of, not a guarantee exactly, but a sort of peace of mind.
A little bit of reassurance.
Exactly, reassurance, yeah. And so I did speak with a hypnotherapist about things that I could do to sort of not be so worried. And I spoke to the therapist about the sort of pressure I put on myself to perform. This isn't so much now, but when I was younger, it's how I met most of my sexual partners was like, I write a column about sex, And then so there was probably some assumption that I knew what I was doing or was good at it to some degree. So I put a lot of pressure, even though it was a great icebreaker, I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform well.
Yeah. In other words, you set the tone. It was a great way to get the conversation started, but it also had at least self-imposed implications that you should be a great sexual partner and should never encounter performance issues if you are an expert on the topic. Of course, you are human. Speaking of pressure, penis size is an area that causes a lot of anxiety and insecurity for some men.
Yeah.
What have you learned about this area, as well as some of the ways men try to increase their penis size?
Well, I've written so many articles about penis size, and generally, up until very recently, the two things that all of my articles said basically the same thing, which is it's not you're probably in the normal range. Your most, at least female partners, because that was what most of the studies were on, are satisfied with the size of their partner's penis, and most interventions don't work aside from diet and exercise. And if you want to increase the appearance, if you want to make it seem as though your penis looks larger, a little bit of trimming could help. So now after that, I have looked into some other things. I did try some. I did try a device that was created for men who have Peyronie's disease that actually worked, and actually over a period of weeks stretched my penis so it was about half an inch longer than it had been. But my partner didn't like it, so I stopped, and it went back.
That's a really important point that I'm just going to re-emphasize, is that a lot of times I think men are looking for a solution to a self-defined problem that their partners really, number one, probably don't care about more often than not, and two, are not as happy with the solution as the men who are trying to find it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I did this thing, and then sex became painful for my partner. So it was a bit of it was shooting myself in the foot or in the penis or in, I don't know. That didn't work out well. Now, there are some other interventions that do seem, a bit more real. There are a bunch, obviously, like there are surgeries that people do. There's this thing called jelqing, which is more likely to result in harming oneself and actually, damaging one's sexual function if you do it wrong or do it too much, which is a sort of manual stretching of the penis. And then there are people that put fillers, or there's this device, silicone sleeve that goes into the penis. But as I said before, like it's a problem that exists in the minds of people that own penises much more than it is in the minds of the partners of those people. So yeah.
Okay, now Grant, having covered erectile dysfunction over a number of years, if I had to ask you to leave our listeners with a final message or two, what would that be?
From what I've seen and what I've experienced personally, I think that being present and being in the moment and being relaxed are the best things you can do to improve your sexual function and have the erections that you usually have when you're on your own. Because I've been in situations where I've been with partners. I've noticed, oh wow, I have better erections when I'm on my own as opposed to when I'm with this person. And what's different? Well, she's not there, and it's a low stakes situation, and I'm relaxed, and I'm not trying to impress anyone, and it's just me. So kind of like bringing that mindset somehow to being with a partner, I think that's what it would be. Communication is a big part of that. And also, knowing your body and knowing what works for you and being clear with your partner about that. Because I've had partners who have expected me to respond in a certain way, to immediately be ready for sex with them, when I know my body and I know that I need a certain amount of foreplay and a certain amount of sexual things that I like to do to get to the level of arousal that I want to be at, So I think it's knowing your body and being kind of assertive about like what you need. And you would hope, obviously, that they would be assertive about what they need too.
If I was going to put this into a couple bullet points, tell me if I'm capturing this, but person has to know what works for them. They've got to be able to communicate that and work to create a relaxed atmosphere in order to just have the kind of robust erections that they want.
Yes. I wish you were around all the time, Mark, just to, summarize my like blabberings into these concise bullet points, because that's exactly right. Yes.
Great. You're welcome to listen to the podcast as many times as you want.
Cool.
Yes, really appreciate you joining us today. And our listeners are going to benefit from hearing all that you have learned and all that you have covered and about your experiences, which I really appreciate you just being so open and sharing with us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Erectile Dysfunction Radio Podcast. For more information on today's topic and understanding how the mind impacts erectile dysfunction, please visit erectioniq.com. That's erectioniq.com.